So, like the first thing which I wanted to talk about is I went through your profile a bit. I saw that you have worked as a software engineer, full stack developer, senior
Mm.
software engineer. Then you started your own companies. You have also worked in talent acquisition, if I'm not wrong. And
Yeah,
then you started crushing digital, right? So I think
yeah.
lots of things to dig deep into, right?
Mm.
So can you like start from the beginning? How did you
Yeah.
get started? How did you navigate through all of this?
Yeah, so there's some overlap between some of those things, and I'll focus mostly on that. But I wasn't one of those typical kids who, lots of these teenagers seem to know they want to be a developer from birth, right? That wasn't me. I came from a very IT oriented family. My dad was in IT.
Mm,
My one brother is a developer. Another brother was in the hardware side of things. Um, so it was kind of, I was one of those kids that grew up around computers, but I wasn't interested. There was always someone who could do it for me. So I didn't want to go to do programming or anything like that. And my dad said to me, "You're going to go and do this at university," because I couldn't decide what to do. And he said, "Do this, you'll always have a job." And
mm,
I didn't like him at the time for saying this. He was right, and it did
yeah.
prove to be the right decision. But I got into programming then, and I didn't really enjoy it. Things were all, desktop based back then, and then
Mm,
all of a sudden, when things went web based, I mean, they were starting to go more web based because I graduated in 2000. Then when I moved into at the company I was working at, when it started to move towards the web, then I started to go, oh, I can make websites. And that was interesting to me. And then my
mm,
love of this started. So then I worked my way up from very junior to senior roles. And forward wind many years, I was then working, leading a team, and some of the developers wanted to leave. They'd come in as juniors. The company wasn't willing to offer them more money, so they were going to leave. And they said, "Can you help me?" Because I was always very good at getting the job, not
mm,
great at doing the job, but great at getting the job. So um, I helped some of those developers, and they went on to get great jobs. So one of them suggested, you should do this as a job. And so I thought, well, is that a job? Is that a thing? And then I started this crushing digital thing to teach other people how to do it. And it only ran for about 3 months when a company came in and said, "Hey, we want to talk to you." And I thought they wanted me for my development skills. They didn't. But they'd seen this, and I was saying, "Oh, I teach developers how to stand out." So they said, "Well, can you come and do that for us?" And I knew of this company. I was, yes, okay. Um, and that's where I like to say I was tricked into being a recruiter. So I joined them to teach developers how to stand out, which then led to me running and building a recruitment team. And
mm,
then, so I thought I knew a lot about this from interviewing for jobs myself and then interviewing developers for my teams. But it wasn't really until I then started to interview thousands of software developers and see them make the same mistakes over and over and over. And it led to phrases that I used all the time. And I say them in the courses I run now. The best developers rarely get the job. It's the ones that sell themselves that do.
mm,
And, you know, I then, as working as someone in recruitment, you tend to work for the client. They're the ones paying the bill.
yeah.
And that's why most software developers don't like recruiters because
Mm,
they know they're not working in their best interests. I was working in recruitment, but as a developer, I'm always going to be on the side of the developer.
mm,
So it was never a natural fit for me, but I learned so much running three different international recruitment teams. So then I took what I learned from there and thought, I don't really want to do recruitment, but I want to continue to work on the side of the developer and help them to stand out. So now I know all the mistakes you can make. I've seen every single mistake. So now I've gone back and revamped all that and teach developers how to get past recruiters, how to get
Mm,
noticed. And that's what led to this. And it's evolved a lot because I was hiring very senior developers at the time. Um, and I wrote my initial course for very senior developers, and it started off as a Udemy course and it's changed a lot. And then trying to tell senior developers that they suck at anything, like their profiles aren't great, is a very hard sell. Uh,
mm,
they're used to being told you're great and you're worth a lot of money and all that. And they are, but they'd be worth more if they could unpack their value. So the people who did listen and react and engage with me were more juniors and people trying to break in. And that led me to working with coding boot camps and juniors. And then that's been, the rest is history. It's been great. And then nowadays I'm getting a lot more of the senior developers coming to me and saying, hey, you've got this thing for juniors, but what about helping us seniors? And people are, senior developers I've worked with over the years. And
mm.
it's quite nice explaining to them that actually I wrote it all for you as seniors, but you weren't listening back then. So it's actually the same problem if we scratch the surface and dig into the real problem. So that's what I do today, is show developers of all levels how to get the job. And it's, this market right now is
Mm.
incredibly difficult,
Yeah.
but there are ways to stand out. And most developers are just sat there hitting easy apply, and I get so many developers saying I've applied to hundreds of jobs and heard nothing. And I
Mm,
always ask them the same question: where and how are you applying? And I've never had a different answer to it. It's LinkedIn, Indeed, Total
mm.
Jobs. And then you realize we're all applying in the same place, in which case it's a lottery win to get the job. But if I can get them to think differently, if I can get them to present themselves differently, apply differently, then people start to have a lot more success. And that's what I do today.
That's that's very interesting. You have a very unique, I think, journey so far, and I would want to like delve into a lot of points that you
Mm,
just said, right? So, how to stand out, where to apply, how to sell yourself better, right? So, I'll just break it down into few parts and let's go deeper into each of them, right?
sure.
So, let's start with resume, or let's start with where to apply, right? Like you mentioned, most people apply on LinkedIn, easy apply, right? It's so frictionless. But how do you think a developer should look for their ideal companies and how to reach out to them in a way, in a nice way?
Yeah. So if you wait for a company to advertise on a big job board, I always think, this is like evolution. We think humans have been on this planet forever, and if you actually look in the grand history of time, we're just the newest thing, and it's such a
Mm,
small fraction of time. And that's the way I see jobs. These companies are always interested in talent. But the moment we're all waiting for that moment when they advertise a job,
mm,
and you being there, available, ready with your resume in hand at that moment, the chances are so
mm,
small, in which case you're limiting yourself to less than 1% of the market. So the way we like to think about recruitment is companies, maybe they're sat there during stand-ups or during, their sprint retro or something like that and going, we should hire. And then they pick up the phone and call an agency and say, hey, have you got developers? And they say, yes, we do, and send somebody over. This is never the way recruitment works. It never has been. Recruiters are calling that company, they're bombarding that company with emails, trying to get them to open up a position. So
mm,
it's the recruitment job is not just reacting to the job that comes to them, it's being proactive about opening a position. And I
mm,
want developers to think like the recruiter and go and open that position, because in this market, when you ring up or email a company and say, are you hiring? The standard answer is
mm,
no. And then the recruiter says, please, I really need some money. And they go, well, we're always hiring if somebody interesting comes along. What does that mean? It means that you have skills that they value. So you use the same tech stack, the same
mm,
skills that they want to use, and the fee for hiring you is not too high. Now, people don't realize how expensive recruiters are.
Mm.
standard UK, US prices 15 to 20% of the salary. It's
Wow.
thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money. So in this market, certainly for the juniors, are you willing to spend, $10,000 or more to hire someone? Personally, I wouldn't be spending that money. Certainly when
Mm.
you can see that there's a lot of developers out there looking for work, we could find someone. So
Mm.
you ask for referrals. Has anyone applied direct? So my mission is to get developers to actually start looking at, are there companies, even start locally, and certainly for the juniors, finding a local company, they're more willing to invest locally. But you find those companies that already do hire people using your tech stack, and then
Mm.
present yourself forward saying, I'm interested in working with you, and here's my resume. So now you're someone of value because you know the tech stack is correct and the fee for hiring you is zero. So they're probably
Mm.
sat there looking at a spreadsheet right now with 20 developers on it from the recruiter, of which they could speak to any one of them for $10,000 or more. Or there's
Mm.
you for zero. You at least get an interview. Now,
Mm.
I always say in the job boards problem, if you advertise on those big job boards, you're going to get big numbers. So let's go with a small number and say it's 1,000. And I used to say recruitment is a speed game. They're trying to get a good enough developer in front of that client before any of their competitors do. So you've
Mm.
usually got a few days. In which case, how do you interview? How do you process? How do you find who's the best in 1,000 developers in a few days? You
Mm.
don't. So you pick the ones that stand out and present themselves in the best way, because you don't want to jump into an interview with somebody where you're not quite sure if they use the right tool
Yeah.
set. You're not quite sure if they've got good experience. So they look for people with evidence in front of them and they say, I'll jump into an interview with you.
Mm.
So I work in a bunch of ways. One is to fix LinkedIn, to fix your resume, to fix your supporting evidence so that everything points in the same direction, that you're making it very easy for someone who looks at your profile or your resume and says, I see what in the direction you're going. I see your value. I can see how you've made it obvious that you're using not just the language and the framework, but all of the complementary skills. And then we start putting that under the noses of all the companies that are interested in you, because they always say, we're always interested in hiring if somebody interesting comes along. We just
Mm.
need you to be someone of interest. If someone does take a look, we need that profile to sing. And then we
Mm.
need to get in there by being a bit more proactive and not just waiting for someone to advertise a job, but getting on their radar early so that when they turn around next month or in 2 months and say, we really should hire,
Mm.
rather than when they're in that way, should we hire? Do we want to spend $10,000 right now? But what about this person who sent in their resume?
Mm.
And as soon as I can get them to attack this on two different fronts, or many different fronts, actually, then we start to get a lot more success.
I think that's a great point. Like if you wait for the company to start advertising, you're probably too late already. I think
Exactly.
it's a very good point. And what
Mm.
about like the correct people to reach out to in the organization? So as a developer, should I be reaching as higher as possible, like the CTO or VP of engineering? It depends on the company. How do I figure out who to, reach
So
out to?
I've had interesting um, experiences with this. And I do it myself, reaching out to, I work with a lot of coding bootcamps, so I'm reaching out to them. And initially, I used to just email the email on the website, hello
Mm.
at, info at, something along those lines. And that proved to be very successful. And then I thought I should be more strategic as I, listened to developers saying, use some tool that allows you to find the right email address of the right person or contact the right person on LinkedIn. I don't know if you've tried doing these strategies and finding these people. Most of the time, these people don't want to be bothered. And if they've got
Mm.
the title that does entice people to reach out, they're probably being bombarded, in which case they get better and better and better at filtering you out. In the
Mm.
position you're in, you're probably bombarded quite a lot. certainly with the business and the background to the business, you're going to be bombarded. So
Mm,
there's a lot of noise for you to sift through. And I sometimes put it in the way that when I know I'm going to advertise a big job on LinkedIn, I know I'm going to get a lot of people applying. So I set up a funnel and I want people to go through that funnel. I don't want people stepping outside of it because you cause me a logistical problem. So I want everyone to go through that funnel. So when I started changing it and trying to attack the right person, my success started to diminish. And then
mm,
after 9 months of that, I decided to go back to the original approach of just follow. They've put an email address on their website because they want you to email that, fill in the
mm,
contact form. And then as soon as I started changing back to that, the success started coming back up. And that's what I find with developers. Sometimes you might be reaching out to the company, you'll hit a brick wall, in which case, try reaching out to the right person on LinkedIn, try finding different email addresses. But in the initial instance, it's much quicker to just send an email. And my theory on this, because it's so successful for me, my theory is when you message that correct person, oh, another person, filter, filter, filter. Whereas you send this email to hello at, and it goes through to some marketing team, and nobody
mm.
emails the marketing team. They're like, yes, we got a message, and they read it and they go, oh, it's not for me, it's for the development
Mm,
department, and they forward that message on. But you've played
mm,
the game, so it's not like I say only try one strategy. I think you try that and then you try different things. But in the most cases, I think the more we try to bypass things and more we try to infiltrate, the more it goes against the grain and people don't like it and more people start to filter you out. So I actually get most success from just being upfront and honest and using either the contact form or emailing the email address that's on the website.
I think that's quite true. Like we opened some positions like
Mm.
few months back, and the job market being what it is, right? I got so many like thousands of messages on LinkedIn that I couldn't reply, right? But and same on Twitter, but surprisingly less number of people applied on the email listed on our website, which is where we found one of the candidates from. So that's quite true, I think. And and what about like the resume and LinkedIn profile and all those sort of things? Where like what are the most common mistakes according to you which people make?
So the most common mistakes developers make is they think like developers. And I know that sounds strange. Um, so I get a lot of pushback when I talk about how to stand out. I'll get pushback from senior developers, and they talk about, oh, it might sound sometimes a bit buzzword heavy. It might
Hmm.
sound almost gimmicky in the way we're presenting it. So lots of senior developers will say, on their LinkedIn headline, software developer, software engineer. And then I say, yeah, but doing what? And they go,
Hmm.
well, I can do anything. Now, I've been a developer for 24 years. I understand that, I've moved around different languages, different frameworks, different libraries. Of course we do. That's the life of a developer. But
Hmm.
if you're then also that developer that's applying on the big job boards and you're using recruiters, does the recruiter believe that you are a polyglot just because you say software
Hmm.
engineer and I can do anything?
Hmm.
We don't. We just don't. To a recruiter, uh, it's like saying, well, of course I can speak French. I can speak, English.
Hmm.
The recruiter's thinking the two languages. I don't see any evidence. So we as developers think that way, and this is where most developers then push back and say, "Oh, the recruiters need to learn more about
Hmm.
tech." But the recruiters do want to learn more about tech. They often ask, "Can I be put through courses? Can I be trained, etc.?" And more often than not, the companies say, "No, just find
Hmm.
someone faster than our neighbor so that we get money." So they're given no time, and it's a speed game. So they end up selecting those people who evidence it, and they're
Hmm.
looking that they've got a job specification in front of them, which it might say, I'm looking for a React developer, and then it will have the nice to have skills whether that's TypeScript or a testing library like Jest or React testing library. They've got a list of things, and the quicker they can see those things, the more confident they get. So we need to write LinkedIn profiles and resumes in layers. And the first layer is for that person. I don't know if you do this, but most people do. If you were Googling something, you Google it, and then when the first page comes up, you right click and open up 4 or 5 tabs. And then you look at each one for about 5 to 10 seconds to decide, is this the answer to what I've been looking for? No, 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 no. And this is where I say what happens in recruitment is you all apply for the job and they've got hundreds or thousands of people to go through, and they open up everyone's LinkedIn profile about 10 to 15 at a time, because otherwise LinkedIn will shut your account down for 24 hours. It's really annoying. So then I say it's like Tinder for jobs. They look at your LinkedIn profile for about 10 seconds and go, no, 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 no. Oh, yes. And so how many people are we going to interview in usually the 3 days I've got? Maybe 10? In which case, out of the 1,000 people that applied, 990 of you are going to be rejected by a recruiter who's not technical and they didn't read your profile. They made a snap decision. Now, senior developers are correct in saying, oh, they should read my profile. If you jump into an interview with me, you'd see that I'm great. But I'm not going to jump into an interview with you if it doesn't look promising as a recruiter. Because if I have to explain to my boss, we missed out on that client because I took time interviewing this person. Why did you interview this person? Because they said they were senior and I should take a chance. And it didn't work out. And they go, that's a lovely story that you've really taken the time to get to know them. You're fired. And I don't want to get fired. I want to get paid. So we hedge our bets and go with the person who presents well. So you have to write that resume and that LinkedIn profile for that person who's just going to scan it and see if they can see value. And then you have to consider, if I do make it onto the next stage, when someone reads deeper, do I then hit the points there? Do I get invited to an interview? Because at the moment you're applying, certainly if you're applying on big job boards and you're one of 1,000 or one of 2,000, 3,000 applicants, your odds are not good. But if I can get you to get past those first couple of filters, you end up in an interview and you're one of 10. Your odds just went dramatically through the roof. And that's the game, is to understand that don't hate the recruiter. If you're using recruiters in this way as a developer, the recruiter is your customer, and the customer is always right, as we know. So if you're playing that game, we need to learn more about recruitment, not recruiters learn more about tech. Now, as a developer, I've hated recruiters most of my life. And then I became one and realized I'm playing the game wrong. Now, do I think that recruiters should be given more training and be shown how to find great developers? Yes. But this world is not going to change that quickly. So we should fight the good fight. We should try and get people to understand more. And I think the more people that come through boot camps but don't end up as developers, they realize it's not for them, but then they're going into maybe into recruitment fields with a technical understanding. I think that will change. But if you need a job, if you want a job right now, you need to learn more about recruitment, because they're your customer.
Like I had one of these experiences. So when I first started my previous company and we hired a recruiter for the first time, I went on a call and I said that a good developer can come in many forms, right? And you need to be able to identify that. So you look at their GitHub profile, look at their portfolio, and like all the things that you should do, right? But after like going through that for a week, I realized it's not going to work. So what I asked them is just look at the tech stack, look at the experience, look at the past companies, education, and the rest of the filtering I'll only do or someone else will do, right? Because it's just way more efficient. So,
Yeah.
but as a developer, you never think in that terms. I think that's a very important point. And what about the next step? So let's say I am selected for the interview, right? What have you seen in the interview? What goes wrong more often for developers?
So you'll hear across social media, more business people talk about this when they're trying to build a business, when they're trying to post on social media, we talk about delivering value, commenting on other people's posts, delivering value. And it's so widely misunderstood. So when you get into the interview, it's to provide value. And what does that mean? Now, as developers, again, we're like, oh, I can talk about this tech and I can talk about these concepts that therefore show that I'm good. But that's probably not what the person sat in front of you is worried about, concerned about. So you'll often need to try to understand that what's that person thinking? That person's thinking, I need to get someone who slots in quickly to get this project out on time. I'm worried about these things. You need to think about what they're concerned about. And I talk about, you might be going in there to talk about your Node and React skills, but actually they've got a real problem with their cloud implementation. They've got a problem with the person who knew some tool like GraphQL. They've left. They've got some gap that they need to fill quickly in order to get the team back up to speed. And you're about to go into the interview and talk about the things that you find important. You're going to talk about your Node and React skills, when actually the other things that are on your resume are the reason why you got into the room, and you don't know what those things are. Now you're about to spend an hour talking about those things. All the other developers are going to sit there and go, it's a Node and React job. I'm going to talk heavily about Node and React. Whereas if you actually talked about your AWS skills, GCP skills, or you talked about GraphQL, you talked about those things that were missing. Now you're not just presenting yourself as another developer, you're presenting yourself as a solution to that person's problem. And now you're providing value.
That's a good point. And in your experience, like has the interview format changed a bit? So I think lots of developers complain about this, that you have to do lots of lead code, lots of DSA stuff to get in, which might not be that relevant. In your experience, is that still the case, or has it changed, or it depends?
I think I think it's becoming worse in my view. And this obsession, I don't know why people, I ask this question a lot. Why do people put data structures and algorithms together? Why? How is that a thing? I mean, data structures, sure. I mean, you can't get on in life as a developer without data structures. Why algorithms? Like, I don't know about you, having had to use various algorithms throughout my
Not
career,
really.
you don't use them very often, but if you need one, you Google it, you learn how to implement it, and then you forget it. It's such a bizarre concept, but so this is that classic thing with us all applying on big job boards on LinkedIn. So you're going to get thousands of applicants. Now, the mission of recruiters and employers using big job boards, using recruiters, is to push the bar up, not to go, we want a better developer. It's just, we're not interviewing 1,000 people. Just, we haven't got the time, the money, the resources to do this. So it used to be years ago, who's got a qualification from this university? Who's got this piece of paper, which gets rid of 90% of the people. Thankfully, those days are largely behind us, and we're starting to realize that's not the way to change it. But now we've got this, well, unless you know 15 algorithms, you're not getting, but if you're applying to a place where there's thousands of applicants, they're going to need to put more and more filters, more and more hurdles in place to get rid of many of you for no apparent reason. So that market is getting worse and worse and worse, which is causing a lot of anxiety, and is a lot of the time the foundation of imposter syndrome, where people go, how do people remember 20 algorithms? Like, you don't. There's no need to. It's crazy. But there is still that underlying market of companies, as you were talking to, who need talent. They want a decent human being with a good foundation in programming, and the rest you'll be learning anyway, because the best thing about tech is it changes all the time. So they know if you're going to work there for any length of time, the tech's going to change anyway. It's not about what you know, it's about that enthusiasm and passion for what you actually do, which is what we need to demonstrate. But those companies are out there, but they're largely not advertising on the big job boards, and they're certainly not advertising on the big job boards right now at the moment you're looking. So
Mm,
you're, and I often say developers go and join companies for the tech or for the money, and they leave because of the people. And I would go and find a good team of people who actually care about not just the product they're building, but they care about their code and they care about their tech and their passion. Join
mm.
that team, and you'll learn so much, and you'll have the best experience. Whereas if you join for the money, you're going to be unhappy if the team's not right, and there's no way to change it. So I say go and find people who are interested in the same things as you, or if they've got a different skill set, but they're equally as inspired about the thing that they're doing, and that's a great team. And if you can find a company that wants to support that, you win.
And one more point that most developer have a question about nowadays is frequent job shifting. How big a red flag is it to the recruiters?
Uh, Largely, it's not a problem at all. In fact, in a number of places I've worked, it's a red flag if you haven't moved. If you've been as it goes past that 2 to 3 year 4 year window,
Mm,
then the concern is about you becoming stale and that you're working on legacy things and you're not keeping up to date. So it's
mm.
okay to work somewhere for a longer period of time, but then the burden of proof that you're keeping up to date and doing something is the same.
Agree.
So if you're a senior, if you're becoming that team lead, the usual fear is, are you still hands on? In which
Mm,
case, it's okay to have those titles and say, I manage a whole team, I'm great. But now that what's the fear of that person looking at your profile? Do they still code? What portion of the day do they code? So now you have to evidence the fact that you're still coding. So if you're working somewhere for a long time and you like that company, great. But how are you keeping up to date? Where can they see evidence of that? It's rare if you're working somewhere for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months and moving on all the time, then it looks like either you're freelancing, which case there's no depth to this, or you're really not a good cultural fit wherever you're going, and there's some other concern. So
mm.
it just depends on the frequency. If you're constantly moving every couple of years, you're probably in that sweet spot of golden.
Got it. And one point that you mentioned, like, and I find this very interesting that a lot of people in tech sometimes get out of love from tech and want to be engineering managers or team leads, right? And some of it is, I think, motivated by like by being more ambitious in your career that you want to grow faster, and that's great. But some of it is also motivated by that you don't want to code every day or more like that, right? But I recently, like in the last 1.5 years, saw that a lot of especially big tech companies are moving away from that culture in which like more and more people are expected to contribute to the tech part of it rather than the management part of it. Do you have any like thoughts on that? Is it changing? Do you think it's just as it was?
Uh, I think it is changing. I think because tech eats everything. If you have a marketing department right now, you need someone with technical skills within it. No matter
Mm,
which department you have, there is a technical need. So that more hands-on is definitely a requirement. But I also think the problem of years gone by, and I think in my day, it was like your value goes up when you become a team leader, a manager, when you're in charge of people. And I think
mm,
now we're still only just starting to brush the surface of this, but starting to realize that why should the manager be paid more?
mm,
And it used to be in terms of responsibility. Well, there's actually a huge responsibility in looking after the code and making sure our livelihood doesn't fall over when we all go home.
mm,
That's a huge responsibility. I just think So like when I first started talking to you earlier, I'm open and honest enough to say I wasn't a great developer. I did very well for myself, but I was in that golden era of, where the keyboard is, therefore you get a job because, there was very few coders back then. But I think I was a better team leader than I was a developer.
Mm,
But I think lots of developers who are great developers want to realize their worth, and they think that they need to jump into this team leadership role. And then they get there thinking that's when they'll get respect. And then they get there and realize I don't actually enjoy this, and this is not my natural skill set. And I think
mm,
we as employers need to be encouraging those people to stay, and even the language I'm using is wrong, to stay where they are, is to recognize the value of where they are and pay them,
mm,
going, why should, just because that person manages the project doesn't mean they earn more money than the person who's developing the project. So I think I'm starting to see the signs of that. And I see a lot of people jump into the team leadership and go back. And I think more people are recognizing to go with what they actually enjoy and what they do. The problem we've got at the minute is companies are still paying more for that leadership role. And we need to just get rid of that and get rid of the, oh, I'm the leader, therefore I'm better than you.
mm,
I always loved the fact that I was the dumbest person on my team. I was just better at motivating and leading and guiding a team, and that all my developers were really good developers and they were better at writing code than I ever was. So why do I can't go, well, I just want to get my hands dirty in code. And then everyone be like, please stay out of the code, Dave. You're making a mess. But it's recognizing what you're good at, but the company needs
mm.
to value that as well.
Got it. And yeah, one more thing about remote jobs. So I noticed that you have worked in Arc.dev, right? Like from what I read, it's a platform for finding remote jobs for
Yeah.
software developers, right? So do you think it is becoming more and more prominent, or was it more a COVID-led thing and it has sort of plateaued? And what do you think about like the pros and cons of that approach? Because I see a lot of people, a lot of software developers looking solely for the remote jobs, and like fairly so. Like there are lots of pros as well, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
So I've worked on and off remote since 2005. But then in terms of hiring the developers, I started before COVID.
Mm,
Um, but remote had this aura around it. It's the digital nomad life. We're all sat on a beach coding, and um, actually, that's not really true. That's what's sold to
mm,
people a lot. So companies companies usually go remote for one of two reasons. One is to find technical excellence that they just can't find locally, or they're trying to reduce the wage bill. And um, so I'm often guiding developers on how to stand out, but then you have to also realize, where you are in terms of. So I say to someone, are you technically the best? In which case, are people coming to find you? In which
mm,
case, you can charge, you know, wonderful um, salaries, and that's great. And but if you're not, then you're trying to get that job based off just because you're remote. Well, I can pay someone locally, and if
mm,
I do think people should be paid the same around the world for doing the same job, regardless of where you live. In an ideal world, that's what I want. But again, I could advise you, fight the good fight, hold out for that money. But if you need
yeah.
a job right now, you might have to accept that being cheaper as a UK person, I'm cheaper than the US. That's my leverage. And I don't
Mm,
want to give that up. That's what gets me in the door
mm,
sometimes. So I think people are, when they're going remote, they should understand what is their value offering. Is it I'm just technically wonderful? In which case, learn to present that in the right way so that you stand out and you will get noticed, and we can work on that. But if you're not that person, you just, I'm so worried about the words as I say them, but I'll just say it for the sake of it. If you're just another worker, just another developer, like we all are, myself
Mm,
included, my value would have been leveraging the money. So I think people are thinking, I'm going to go and live that nomadic life.
mm,
Actually, when you present yourself this way, most employers are still nervous of that, which is why they're going back to hybrids and things like that. Most of these companies, I think during COVID, they went remote. Now, they didn't really.
mm,
It wasn't remote work, it was remote abandonment. What they did is they said, okay, everyone go home. We'll invest nothing in that infrastructure.
mm,
And now with the hybrid side of things, all the money that they're spending on the offices and the things that happen internally is flourishing because they spend a lot of money on it. And everyone who's kept outside is abandoned. And they're all sat there going, am I involved? Do I get an invite to the
mm,
meeting? And it's not incorporated in the same way. Of course, that's going to fail. But those
mm,
companies that embrace it and go, we're all remote, we operate in that way, that succeeds. But if you're just hoping that, I'm going to get this remote job so I don't even have to turn up to work, I'll just be on the beach pretending, that's not really true. It's not really real. What you should be presenting is, regardless of my geographic location, I'm here, professional and ready to work. And those
mm.
workers tend to do very, very well.
Yeah. I think like we were a remote and we still are a remote first company. But sometimes what happens is that there are few people who try to take advantage of that situation and then it spoils it for everyone, right? Then it
Yes.
creates an environment of distrust. And I
Mm.
think that's one big problem that needs to be solved with remote work.
Yeah. And I can honestly say, having hired developers through Arc and others, I think it was actually one of the strap lines of Arc that the best developers are everywhere. And I've
Mm.
seen no evidence that this country's developers are better than this country's. I've found great developers in
Every-
almost every country.
mm,
I think the more companies start to realize this and start to open up and hire remote, I think they're going to have a lot more success because they can get technically much better developers if they just start to assess people and look at people based off their merit, not off their geographic location.
mm. Got it. Got it. All right, David, that was great. I think I got to learn a lot from you regarding recruitment. Any sort of conclusion or final advice for people who are looking out for jobs or I think everyone is looking out for jobs either passively or actively. Anything
So
that you would like to?
I mean, obviously, I have a course. I have a bunch of courses that do this. So please feel free to visit pushing.digital and look at those. But the main thing, regardless of whether you're interested in a course, I put lots of free content out there on TikTok and LinkedIn almost every day. But the main backdrop to this is I know that your technical ability and the fact that you've got a great grasp of the fundamentals of programming and you're a great programmer underneath, that is our real value. But if you want people to see that value, you need to be in the room with them. You need to be in the interview. You need to get the job. And if we want to learn to get the job, we have to learn to sell and market ourselves. So the greatest problem for developers right now is so when these developers say, I've applied to so many hundreds of jobs and heard nothing, and I ask them, what are you going to do? And they say, oh, well, I'm going to go and learn another algorithm. And how is that going to help? So if you want people to see it, you need to learn to sell. And I always use examples like Nike make, running shoes, but they still need to market. We all know what they do. We know how it works, but they still spend millions of dollars advertising to you to tell you not about the details of the shoe and what it's made of, but what's the benefit to you? How can you use this to get the body that you want, to get fit, to get healthy, to get this lifestyle? And that's you as a developer, you think the value for you is all about those, coding things you can do. And it's not, it's about the value that you can deliver to a business so that can make money. And we need to learn to unpack that and market it and sell it. So don't just think about your technical skills. Think about learning to sell yourself. Like I say, the best developers rarely get the job. The ones that sell themselves the best that do. Do I like it? No. Is it the way the world works? Yes.
I think that's very true. And I think a lot of people will find value in what you create. Do you want to talk a bit about Crushing Digital and also what's next for you?
So, yeah, I mean, I started off Crushing Digital. I did a book and a course, and then it's evolved a lot over time. So now in that course, you get there's 50 something videos currently. I put out free lessons every day or every other day. So there's two versions of the video course. One, you just get all the videos, and you get there's 2 workshops a week and checklists and a library of templates for you to use and things like that. But then the more expensive one, the $75 one, you get unlimited profile reviews. So you're constantly working on your resume or your LinkedIn profile, and then you make a request to me every day if you like, and I send back videos saying change this, do this, move this here until we get it right, and I support you until you tell me to stop. So those are the 2 options that are currently there. I'm launching as we speak a 3rd option, which sounds like a bizarre, because the 3rd option is $1,000, and it's a far more mentored approach. So it's the same content in terms of the videos, but we literally work very closely. So I work with you really intensively for a whole month, getting everything together. And then for the next 3 months, we slow down a little bit in terms of how often we meet, but I'm sweating every single detail on it. And for that $1,000, if you don't get a job offer by the end of the 3 months afterwards, I give you all your money back. So I've had a few people going through this course. We're about to put a video out about it at the minute. It's proving very successful. It just depends on how serious you are at doing it and how motivated you are. Because for that $1,000, I sit and make you do it. And that's kind of the thing that I see with developers coming through coding boot camps. They always fall into these 3 buckets, 3 cohorts. It's like some people engage with it, do it, run away, and they're successful at it. Some people dabble a little bit, and this is what happens on my course. People make changes to their LinkedIn profile, and then they start to get a little bit of attention from recruiters, and they go, yeah, I win, and they run away, and I'm like, no, stay, there's more. And they come back then 3-4 months later and say, I've applied to 300 jobs, I've heard nothing, and I go, now we're ready. It's like I've got to break people before they're ready. And then there's the last group of people who never engage at all, that they just don't seem to get it. My encouragement for you is to do it. And you don't have to, even if you just watch my content for free, or if you decide to do the $50 course, is to do that, but go all the way through it. And then once you get through to the networking, the job search, if you've got all the other things in place, that's when things will really start. And if you need me to stand behind you and whip you and make it happen, then there's the other approach there. Like I say, with the full money back guarantee. So hopefully there's something for everybody.
I definitely think there is. I think like if somebody gets a much better job, that's money well spent. And I think like a lot of people spend much more money on boot camps, and a lot of that value is already out there on YouTube on courses, right? It's more the selling part which the developers really need to learn, including myself.
Yeah,
So,
and that's the nice thing is it shouldn't really matter which path you take. So people will say to me, I finished a boot camp and didn't get a job. Do I need to go and get a degree? Well, no, because then you'll have a degree and still not have a job. You need to learn to sell it. And you can sell the degree, I can sell the boot camp, I can sell self-taught. But and so lots of people, especially from the boot camps, they say to me, I've got a job after doing the course and thank you for your help. I'll see you in the future when I'm ready for that next step, the mid-level job, the senior job. And I always say, if you've been listening, you don't need me anymore. The concept is the same. And it's like that's what we need to really start to unpack, is just this selling thing.